Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to NTV Europe's weekly chat show, Talking Point. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmad. In our studios today, we have a gentleman whom I can call probably properly somebody who really belongs to East London. Raised in East London, born in East London, he discovered the pleasure of Western, or rather watercolors, at the age of 11. The set he bought at a cheap shop. I won't name that shop because that will be advertising. Since then, he has never looked back. Saif Osmani is a visual and a spatial designer, a multidisciplinary creative practitioner. He specializes in fine arts and architectural design. His work has been influenced by architectural field and has his abstract expressionist social realism that reflect cultural shifts. What are cultural shifts? We'll discover that. Resulting from changes, again we'll discover that in the interview today, in the built environment. That is perhaps East London, is it?
East London, yeah.
Welcome to the show, Saif.
Thank you for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. It's a pleasure to have you here. We have met before, but I've seen some of your work. I haven't visited your exhibitions, but I have heard so much about them. And we'll talk about exhibition, but first of all, tell us something about yourself. How did this journey into art, artistry, designing, architecture began?
Well, my initial interest in art started at A-level, where I was studying four arts-based subjects, and my strong points there were art, fine art in particular. And then when I was accepted at St. Martin's, I thought, well, I must be quite good at it, maybe, you know. So I went towards there. It was either that or English literature. So I went towards fine arts, and in art school, it solidified my understanding of what a career in the arts would be like, and I moved more towards architectural design, spatial design, and gradually I graduated from Chelsea College of Art and Design, and I went towards working in the field for about 10 years. Yeah.
Right. When you went to St. Martin's and you went to Chelsea College of Art, did you meet a large number or good number of our own people there? Because I've been told that our parents, I mean, including myself, we would rather send our children to become accountants, baristas, doctors, engineers, and not art and artists.
Well, there is a challenge, you're right. There is a growing challenge when you're entering the arts when it's non-traditional. And in my case, similarly, yes, the doctor career was knocking there, and so the lawyers or whatever, but I left that to another brother, really.
Right.
And so, but I was always good at art. Like you said, at the age of 11, I picked up watercolors from a very everyday high street shop, and I continued doing that. And that was always my strong point when I'm painting and things like that. Usually I'm absorbing in now much more contextual things about my environment, about what's going on around in society and things like that. And I tried to bring that into the exhibition space. Whereas when I was 11, it was just a case of whether I could paint or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
What was your first painting? When was it, and how was it received?
It was, I remember one...
You can go back to the age of 11.
I remember one particular painting I did of an interior of a neoclassical building, and I did a watercolor wash over it, and my graphic design tutor at the time was a little bit gobsmacked because all the other kids had got a felt tip pen and just scribbled all over it, and I'd kind of put in the detail and put in a few statues and so on. So it was something I was always aware that came quite naturally to me, and I think drawing always came naturally, creative responses came naturally, you know, probably to my parents' annoyance, who knows.
Do you believe that this saying that artists are very sensitive people, and they view things from a very different angle, and they look at life very closely. Is that true?
I think so. I think everyone's got a creative element, and often in the West we're told you've got to be very defined, you've got to go towards one career and that's it. But there's a flexibility there, and I've always felt that the artist's mind is very important to nurture. And having gone through the education system and been brought up here, I've been born here, you realise that there's more of a nurturing than maybe in other countries. Although one of my more important memories growing up was a visit to Bangladesh where I was drawing the local villagers, and the villagers would come to me and say, oh, this is a really great thing that you can draw, you know, you can draw and we can't. And I said, yes, you can, you know, you can draw a horse if you want. And, you know, they would start drawing too.
But you must look at the horse first.
You've got to find a horse in Bangladesh first. So they tried drawing maybe a cow or something. But I remember waking up in the morning and there was suddenly a whole queue of little children who were waiting with a bit of paper and saying, would you get your artist's pens out and draw me a horse? So I spent the whole day drawing horses for them.
Did you find any talents there?
They're in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
Back then?
No, I mean in the village.
In the village there's more native sort of craft-based talent, and that was really inspiring actually, especially when you're looking at colour and colour that represents a country or people.
Yeah,
so
nature mostly, rivers and there are not many mountains around, but still they draw mountains and birds and sunset and boats.
There's a lot of native imagery there. Of fish and so forth. But again, art's always a learning. It's a learning program as well. You're learning about different types of fish. You're learning about different types of animals. And I was learning a lot. I was picking up a lot about how they use different. I was asking, for example, on a fan, where did you get the colours from? And they'd said, well, actually, we need to go to a very far away market to get that colour. You know. Yeah. So there's a process in play. There's a lot of industry in play with the arts and crafts there.
You graduated from Chelsea College of Art, and you were also a visiting tutor at the University of Creative Arts,
Yes.
Which is somewhere in Elephant and Castle, is it?
University, no, this
that's liberal arts, is it?
Yes, this is UCO, University of Creative Art. That was based in Canterbury. So I was mainly tutoring end of year, critiquing end of year sort of. Critiquing end-of-year projects for students, and
undergrads or undergrads?
It was undergraduates, and I mean that was quite interesting, quite exhausting. You know, teaching creative subjects can be quite exhausting.
You have to find creative people first.
You've got to do that, yeah.
When you graduated from Chelsea College of Art and Design, what was your special area of interest?
I moved from Central St Martin's to Chelsea because I was attracted to the architecture aspect because it was more tangible. And often in the creative subjects, you're dealing with quite a lot of intangible things, or a lot of people would say, I don't understand the arts. It's just often, I get that question a lot, and then trying to explain to them is another big enigma as well. So it's quite difficult, but usually you have to go through a process in your foundation where you have to feel very settled in the subject you're in, because different people come from different subjects. Sometimes you get sculptural thinkers in architecture, you get environmental thinkers in architecture. None of them is invalid, because actually you bring something quite interesting to the table.
Right.
So the subject itself is quite broad.
Well, sometimes it can be so cryptic that people, the ordinary persons, I mean laymen, won't understand, and that's why they ask you the question, what is it? Is it a pineapple or a lady? Nothing against
Could
ladies.
Be both.
Could be both,
Prickly
yes.
lady, I think, yeah.
Prickly ladies. Yes. One of your statements I read somewhere, it's always fascinated me how architects are the people who decide how we live our lives, And we are talking about, obviously, we're talking about the houses that architects design, see. I used to know, and my architect's friend told me that first we have to know the person, his personality, what he does, his hobbies, his number of people who will be living in this house, then the ages of the children. And now you're telling me that it's just the other way.
At some point in architectural design, that was important, and it is something we have to consider on a daily basis. If I've got clients who I'm designing for, it's about
right.
future-proofing. It's about looking at what they're going to do in 10 years' time, how they're going to use the space. Is it adaptable? But a lot of the new designs nowadays coming through are based on standards, space standards, lifetime home standards they call it, or Parker Morris. And some of those are quite small. It's not very well considered in my view. They don't particularly work very well if you're looking at different ethnic groups. I think Asian people design or would like spaces very differently. That's why a lot of the time they're adapting their spaces so it fits with their larger families or different areas of hosting and so forth. So there's that's kind of ongoing in terms of studies about how people use their space. But I think with the new influx of buildings right now, you have got a bit of a problem where one size fits all doesn't actually fit all.
Yeah, but we also have a problem with the space, and that is one of the problems that one has to try that to see that expression of yours, one size fits all. See, because there is a multi-story building with so many flats, and people of all kinds are living there with different sizes of the families. See.
Yeah, well, the new developments they've been criticised a little bit of having pour doors. Pour doors are a separate door for the community and a separate door for the private people. Right. But on surface, from afar, it looks like one building and one sense of unity and one community. But that's not the case. I mean, you only have to look at areas like Shadwell, where you can see where the social housing is and more privatised housing is. And that's something I address in my exhibitions now, because, I mean, I come from an activist background over the last 10, 12 years, where I've seen changes happen, and I've tried to kind of address those things as you try to understand them. And what you have there is a disparity between what people want and what the authorities are building and what policymakers are doing.
Yeah, but it's more of a question of accommodating so many X number of people. These are homeless or not living in a standard accommodation, so they have to be moved to this place, and then the other building has to be demolished to made up to date.
Possibly. I mean, in some cases that is the case, but I think in London it's actually a different bubble.
Yes.
You know, you can't really compare London to other cities in England or in the UK generally, because you can only.
Why?
Its economy is very different. I mean, you're looking at London alone brings in a lot more than, let's say, Birmingham or Manchester. And you have to compare London to New York, and that's what they do. You know, when I worked for a developer, that's what we were doing. We were comparing London to New York, the same architects. We wanted the international architects. We wanted the opportunities that might bring, or should, if it does. But what I wouldn't say is correct is that actually people are no longer at the centre of this decision making. Yeah. So what you're finding is there's a lot of empty buildings at the moment in London. Yeah. And London's moving from mid-rise to high-rise now. And for the larger part, London's been mid-rise. There's been a few high-rise, but the larger part has been mid-rise. And so now it's going to high-rise, there's impacts of that. So things like rights of light. So people need light. If there's a tower block coming up in your area, you need to know how to respond to that. So that's an area that certainly, and Bengalis in the East End need to address or find an avenue to address.
Do people prefer to stay or live in high-rise buildings?
No, I think
there's no choice.
I think it depends on how good your marketing is, really. So I think high-rise is desired within aspiring middle classes, maybe from who have an international outset, where they can't do business internationally. They might want to live in a high rise in central London. With families, it's never really worked. And I think there's areas and buildings in the East End which have been knocked down, classic buildings like Robin Hood Gardens, which is a historic building. and that's been knocked down, but actually it doesn't function very well for families, especially for Bengali families there as well. So people are there on living there for short-term periods.
Right, we are almost at the end of this segment, so when we come back, we will definitely go back to these very interesting topics and explore more from an artist friend today. Thank you for being with us. We have come to the end of this segment. Please don't go away. We'll be back soon. Thank you.